My name is Alara Meadows. For most of my 42 years, I've believed in the quiet rhythm of a life well lived, in the gentle unfolding of days, one after the other, like petals on a late-blooming rose. I grew up in the misty coastal city of Port Blossom, a place where the scent of salt and rain clings to the air and foghorns sing mournful lullabies in the deep of night. I lived in a small cottage with a periwinkle blue door, a home my grandmother had left me, where I tended to a garden of unruly hydrangeas and stubborn lavender. For 15 years, my professional life had followed a similar, predictable rhythm at Lumina Innovations, a tech firm that promised to illuminate the future. I was a project manager, a weaver of timelines, and a smoother of ruffled feathers, the person who made sure the brilliant, chaotic minds of the engineering department actually delivered something on schedule. I thought my loyalty was a kind of currency, an investment that would one day mature into a peaceful, respected retirement. I knew that belief was a fragile thing the moment a calendar invitation appeared on my screen. It was for a Wednesday morning at 10:07 a.m. The time itself, so oddly specific, felt like a splinter under the skin. Not 10 o'clock, not 10:15. 10:07. It was an appointment with anxiety. The invitation was from David Lowe in Human Resources, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. The subject line read, "Organizational Strategy Session." It was the kind of gentle, meaningless phrase that corporations use to wrap around something sharp. When I walked into the third-floor conference room, the one with the panoramic view of the harbor I'd always loved, the air felt thin and sterile. The new gray carpet, installed just a month prior, absorbed all sound, creating a vacuum of unnerving silence. David was there, of course, seated at the polished oak table, a testament to composed indifference. Beside him was my manager, Robert Vance. For 15 years, Robert had been my professional anchor. We'd weathered product launch disasters, navigated 2 massive corporate mergers, and shared countless lukewarm coffees in the early morning hours. Now he was staring into his porcelain mug as if it held the secrets to the universe, his shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of a battle already lost. He didn't look at me. "Alara, thank you for joining us," David began, his voice as smooth and placid as a stone pulled from a riverbed. My designated chair was already pulled out from the table, a small, chilling courtesy that felt more like an ushering than an invitation. They don't pull your chair out unless they're preparing you for a fall. Then came the speech, delivered in David's serene, unwavering cadence. As Lumina continues to evolve and realign its strategic priorities for the next fiscal quarter, we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding our operational structure. In this new framework, your role has been identified as redundant. Redundant. The word hung in the air, clinical and cold. It wasn't fired. It wasn't let go. It was redundant. As if I were an obsolete piece of code, a function no longer called upon by the main program. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, for Robert to say something, to offer a word of context or protest, or even just to meet my gaze. But he only nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on his mug, a silent, hollow confirmation. I must have drifted for a moment, lost in the silent hum of the overhead lights, because the next thing I knew, a pale blue folder was sliding across the polished table toward me. It moved with a quiet, frictionless grace, a harbinger of finality. "This is your separation agreement," David said, his tone gentle, as if he were offering condolences. "It outlines the details of your severance package, your health coverage continuation options, and the process for your final compensation." He paused, offering a faint, practiced smile. "We truly appreciate your years of service, Alara." Appreciate. The word felt like a hollow echo. As I opened my mouth, though no sound came out, Robert finally stood. The scraping of his chair against the floor was the loudest sound in the room. "David will help you with the next steps," he said, his voice a low murmur, and then he was gone, slipping out the door without a single backward glance. "David will help you." As if I were a lost child, not a woman who had dedicated a third of her life to this company, who had trained half the people on this floor, who had poured her heart and mind into projects that now bore his name. The walk back to my desk was a blur. David followed a few paces behind, a silent warden. My colleagues, sensing the invisible shroud of departure, suddenly found their screens intensely fascinating. No one looked up. It was a quiet, collective shunning, a defense mechanism against the contagion of unemployment. I gathered my few personal belongings, a clay pot holding a thriving jade plant, a framed photograph of my dog, Finn, a golden retriever with ears that flopped at mismatched angles, and a worn copy of Mary Oliver's poems. David gently informed me that the jade plant was technically company property, purchased with a departmental budget. I looked at him, then at the plant, and placed it carefully into my box. I dared him with my eyes to say another word. He didn't. As I walked out of the glass doors of Lumina Innovations for the last time, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me with a soft whoosh, a single thought crystallized in my mind, clear and sharp as ice. They hadn't just ended my employment. They had tried to erase my value. Back in my small cottage, I placed the cardboard box on my kitchen table. Finn rested his heavy head on my lap, his warm, steady breathing a comforting presence in the suffocating silence. I had always imagined leaving Lumina on my own terms, with a farewell party filled with fond anecdotes and promises to keep in touch. Instead, I left with a blue folder, a non-disclosure agreement, and a profound, aching sense of being unseen. But here is the quiet truth about being brought to your knees. The ground is a firm place to push off from. Eventually, the shock subsides, and the stillness gives way to clarity. Buried in the wreckage of what was, you can sometimes find the seeds of what will be. I just didn't know it yet. They had made a mistake, not of malice, but of carelessness. And it was about to change everything. I didn't sleep that night. My mind, usually a calm and orderly place, was a tempest of memories and regrets. I replayed every late night I'd stayed to finish a report for Robert, every weekend I'd sacrificed for a looming deadline, every time I'd quietly absorbed the stress of a project so my team wouldn't have to. I had been a buffer, a shock absorber, and in return, I'd been deemed redundant. By 3 a.m., surrounded by the gentle ticking of my grandmother's grandfather clock, I finally opened the blue folder. Inside, the severance offer was as meager as I'd feared. 3 weeks' pay. 3. For 15 years of service. It was enough to cover my mortgage for a single month, with a little left over for groceries. It was an insult wrapped in legalese. A deep, quiet anger, unfamiliar and unsettling, began to smolder in my chest. It wasn't the fiery rage of a betrayed warrior. It was the slow, burning fire of deep, profound disrespect. The next morning, I drove to a small cafe by the waterfront, a place where the scent of roasted coffee beans mingled with the salty air. I needed to think, to find my footing on this new, unstable ground. I sat with their pathetic offer on one side of the table and a blank notebook on the other, under the heading, "What I Know I Am Worth." It wasn't about money, not really. It was about principle. When I met with David again, it was in a different, smaller room, one without a view. It was a space designed for swift, impersonal transactions. He was seated, sipping from a bottle of sparkling water, his expression one of polite, professional patience. "Alara," he said, gesturing to the chair. "I hope you've had time to review the agreement." I sat down and placed the folder on the table between us. My hands were steady. My voice, when I spoke, was quieter than I expected, but it didn't tremble. "David, I have some questions." For 15 years of dedicated service at a senior level, industry standards for severance are closer to 1 month for every year worked. "This offer is insufficient." He gave me that same placid smile. "I understand this is a difficult transition, Alara. However, this is the standard package for this type of role restructuring. It's a non-negotiable company policy." Non-negotiable. The word was meant to be a door slamming shut. It was intended to signal the end of the conversation, to communicate that my feelings, my history, my contributions were irrelevant in the face of policy. He expected me to be defeated, to be grateful for the pittance they were offering, to sign the papers and disappear quietly. I leaned forward slightly. "So, just to be clear, after 15 years, my contribution to this company is valued at 3 weeks' pay and a pamphlet on how to apply for unemployment benefits?" David's composure remained flawless. He was a master of the neutral mask. "Alara, we value your contributions immensely. This isn't a reflection of your performance. It's simply the policy." A short, humorless laugh escaped my lips, surprising me with its bitterness. "It's not personal, is that what you're saying? Tell me, David, was it not personal when I spent 3 months rebuilding the entire client integration system after the last acquisition? Was it not personal when I mentored the junior project managers, most of whom are still with the company? Was it not personal when I canceled my vacation to oversee the Q4 launch because Robert's son was sick? For the first time, a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed his face. His nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. I understand you're emotional, but the offer is what it is. It is final. And in that moment, I understood. They had never considered the possibility that I would question them. They had built their entire process around the assumption of my compliance, my quiet acceptance. They had priced my silence, and they had priced it low, betting that I was too worn down, too loyal, or too afraid to fight back. They weren't just being cheap, they were being dismissive. They thought my silence was guaranteed. David pushed the folder toward me again, a gentle, final nudge. If you'll just sign here, we can expedite the processing of your final paycheck. I looked at the folder, at the line where I was supposed to sign away my right to any future claims, and something inside me, a core of self-respect I thought had been eroded by years of quiet service, solidified. It became hard and clear as a diamond. I'll have my legal counsel review it, I said, my voice even. I stood up. David blinked, genuinely surprised. The mask had slipped. You're not signing today? No, I said. Not today. His expression tightened. You are within your rights to seek counsel, of course. But I can assure you, the terms will not change. It is standard company policy. David, I interrupted, my voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. If you say the phrase standard policy to me one more time, I will make it my life's mission to understand every single line of every policy this company has ever written. I picked up my bag, left the folder on the table, and walked out of that room. For the first time since the world had tilted on its axis, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman who had just remembered her own name. That evening, I began a strange and somber ritual, the dismantling of my professional life. I pulled out boxes from the attic, filled with years of accumulated corporate artifacts. Performance reviews, project plans, commendation letters, even a ridiculous Team Player of the Year plaque from 2013. I started to shred them, feeding the papers into the machine with a sense of quiet release. It wasn't an act of anger, but one of cleansing. Each whir of the blades felt like letting go of a ghost. Finn lay on the rug, watching me with his soulful brown eyes as my living room floor slowly disappeared under a snowdrift of shredded paper. To 15 years of being a good soldier, I murmured, raising a glass of wine to him. And 3 weeks of severance. A fair trade, don't you think? The shredder overheated and jammed on a particularly thick stack of quarterly reports, and I took it as a sign from the universe to stop. My back ached. My heart ached. I had given so much of myself to a place that, in the end, saw me as nothing more than a number on a spreadsheet. I was about to sweep the whole mess into a trash bag when I noticed it, an old, leather-bound portfolio tucked away in the bottom of a box. It was the folder I had brought to my very first interview at Lumina, back when it was a much smaller, scrappier company. Inside, beneath a stack of old resumes and letters of recommendation, was my original offer of employment, dated May 10, 2009. The paper was thick and creamy, the company logo embossed at the top. I remembered the day I received it, the feeling of elation and security washing over me. I had finally found a place where I could build a career, a place that felt like home. I read through the familiar terms, the starting salary that now seemed so modest, the vacation policy, the health benefits. My eyes skimmed over the dense paragraphs of legal jargon, the words blurring together. And then, deep within the document, in a section titled Employee Equity Incentive Program, I saw it. A paragraph I had likely read 15 years ago, but had completely forgotten, its significance lost on a younger, more trusting version of myself. It read, in the event of an employee's involuntary termination by the company without cause, all unvested stock options and restricted stock units granted to the employee shall be subject to accelerated vesting and become fully and immediately vested as of the termination date. I read the sentence again, and a third time. The words seemed to lift off the page, shimmering in the lamplight. Involuntary termination without cause. David's own words echoed in my memory. This isn't a reflection of your performance. Fully and immediately vested. All of them. Not just the initial grant, but every performance-based refresh I'd received over 15 years. The ones I'd been told wouldn't be worth anything until I'd been with the company for 20 years, or until we hit some astronomical, far-off revenue target. Hope is not always a gentle sunrise. Sometimes it is a quiet, steady flame lit in the darkest room of the house. I sat there, frozen, the document trembling slightly in my hands. A hairline crack appeared in the wall of despair that had surrounded me. Through it, a sliver of light. I took out my phone and photographed the page, then photographed it again, a sudden, superstitious fear gripping me that it might somehow vanish. I had no idea what the shares were worth, or how many there were. I only knew that David Lowe, in his haste to process my redundancy according to his standard policy, had overlooked the one policy that truly mattered. He had handed me a key, and I was beginning to realize it might unlock the very door they had just slammed in my face. I spent the rest of the night online, not spiraling, but researching. I looked for an employment lawyer, scrolling past the flashy websites with aggressive slogans. I wanted someone who understood nuance, who valued dignity as much as victory. I found her on the 4th page of my search, Eleanor Vance. Her practice was small, located in a restored brick building in the historic district of Port Blossom. Her biography was brief, her client testimonials concise but powerful. One read, "Eleanor doesn't just fight for you, she reminds you what you are fighting for." That was the one. The next morning, I made the call. For the first time in days, my voice was filled not with grief, but with a fragile, burgeoning resolve. Eleanor Vance's office was nothing like I expected. It was on the 2nd floor of a handsome, century-old building overlooking the marina, where the masts of sailboats swayed gently in the breeze. The space was serene and uncluttered, with tall windows that filled the room with the soft, gray light of the coast. The walls were lined with books, not law tomes, but poetry, history, and philosophy. The air smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea. Eleanor herself was a woman in her late 50s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm, centered presence. She wore a simple linen dress and carried herself with an understated grace that was immediately disarming. She wasn't a warrior in a power suit. She was a scholar, a strategist. "Ms. Meadows," she said, her voice warm as she gestured for me to sit. "Thank you for coming. Please tell me what's happened." The practiced confidence I had felt on the phone began to waver. Seated across from this composed, thoughtful woman, my story suddenly felt small, my anger petty. I felt a surge of doubt. Maybe I had misinterpreted the clause. Maybe I was making a fool of myself. But then Eleanor met my eyes, and her gaze was so steady, so patient, it felt like an invitation to speak my truth without fear. So I did. I told her everything, the 15 years of loyalty, the 10:07 a.m. meeting, Robert's averted gaze, David's clinical dismissal. I spoke of the feeling of being erased, of having my worth reduced to 3 weeks' pay. Finally, with a trembling hand, I slid the copy of my employment contract across her polished mahogany desk. "Page 7, I said softly. "The 3rd paragraph." She read it once, her expression unreadable. Then she read it again, more slowly. A long silence settled over the room, broken only by the distant cry of a gull. She set the paper down and looked at me, a thoughtful, almost academic curiosity in her eyes. "And you're certain this clause, or any mention of accelerated vesting, was not included in the separation agreement they provided?" "I'm certain," I said. "They didn't mention stocks or equity at all. Only severance pay." A slow, subtle smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of deep, intellectual satisfaction. "Oh my," she said, almost to herself. "They have been extraordinarily careless." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought tears to my eyes. "So, you think I have a case?" "Ms. Meadows," she said, leaning forward slightly, her calm intensifying. "This is not a case in the sense of a messy dispute. This is a matter of contractual obligation. The language here is unambiguous. You were terminated without cause, therefore your shares vested. It is as simple as that. The only question is whether they failed to disclose this out of incompetence or by design." She paused, steepling her fingers. "Either way, their position is untenable." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 3 days. It felt like the first full breath I'd taken since walking into that conference room. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Now, she said, her eyes gleaming with a quiet, strategic fire, we compose a letter. Not a letter of demand, but a letter of clarification. We will gently, politely, and very firmly educate them on the terms of the agreement they themselves drafted. We won't be aggressive. Aggression gives them something to push back against. We will be reasonable. We will be factual. And we will be immovable. She picked up a pen and a fresh legal pad. The most powerful position in any negotiation, Alara, is the one that is grounded in indisputable fact. They believe they hold all the power because they are the corporation. We are about to remind them that the most powerful thing in that building is not their title or their budget, but the words on a piece of paper they were too arrogant to read. I looked around her calm, beautiful office, at the books and the soft light, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had not found a fighter. I had found a guardian. I don't want to destroy them, I said, the words surprising me as I spoke them. I just want them to acknowledge what they did. I want them to see me. Eleanor Vance nodded, a deep understanding in her eyes. I know, she said softly. And that is precisely what we are going to ensure. They will see you. And they will do so by the letter of the law they wrote themselves. The days that followed were a masterclass in patience. Eleanor had been clear. Once the letter is sent, we go silent. We let the silence do the work. It was, she explained, like steeping tea. You couldn't rush it. The flavor, or in this case, the panic, had to be drawn out slowly. She drafted the letter with the precision of a poet. It was a masterpiece of polite, unyielding pressure. It began by thanking them for the recent discussion, then gently pivoted. In the spirit of ensuring a complete and mutual understanding of all relevant agreements, she wrote, we wish to draw your attention to a clause in Ms. Meadows's original employment contract, a copy of which is attached for your convenience. It then quoted the accelerated vesting clause in full. It didn't accuse or threaten. It simply stated a fact they had overlooked, framing it as a helpful clarification. The letter was sent via courier and email at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I worked in my garden, pulling weeds with a vengeance, my hands deep in the cool, dark earth. But my mind was miles away, inside the glass tower of Lumina Innovations. I pictured the letter arriving on David Lowe's desk. I imagined him reading it, his placid expression slowly dissolving as the words sank in. I imagined the hushed, urgent phone calls to the legal department, the frantic search for my original personnel file. The silence was deafening. By Wednesday afternoon, my carefully cultivated calm was beginning to fray. I called Eleanor's office. Her assistant answered, her voice serene. Ms. Vance is in a meeting, but she asked me to tell you that silence is a positive indicator. It means they are taking it seriously. On Thursday morning, I received a text message from Maya, a kind, quiet woman from the marketing department with whom I'd often shared lunch. The message was cryptic. Something strange is going on here. Legal has been in meetings with HR all morning. The whole floor is tense. A few minutes later, another message arrived. I heard your name. Hope you're okay. I stared at my phone, my heart beating a little faster. The ripples were beginning to spread. Eleanor's quiet, polite letter had landed not like a bomb, but like a stone dropped into a still pond, its concentric circles of consequence widening with each passing hour. They weren't ignoring it. They were scrambling. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I knew by heart, one I hadn't expected to see again. It was Robert Vance. I hesitated, then answered, my throat tight. Alara. His voice was strained, weary. There was no preamble. What have you done? I took a slow breath, grounding myself. Hello, Robert. I simply read my contract. He let out a long, tired sigh. This is a nightmare. Do you have any idea the chaos you've caused? The CFO is involved now. The general counsel. They're talking about financial reporting implications, shareholder disclosures. They had to pull the equity reports for the last 10 years. He sounded not just angry, but bewildered, as if I had broken some unspoken rule of a game he thought we were all playing. They told me my role was redundant. Robert, I said, my voice quiet, but firm. They didn't tell me my compensation was. This wasn't supposed to happen, he mumbled, more to himself than to me. It was just a restructuring. A line on a spreadsheet. David was supposed to handle it. He did handle it, I replied. He just didn't handle it very well. He told me the severance was non-negotiable. It turns out my contract was non-negotiable, too. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint hum of his office, the world I no longer belonged to. "They want to meet," he said finally, his voice flat with defeat. "With you and your lawyer." "I know," I said. "Alara." "I'm sorry," he whispered, and the words were so small, so late, they felt like dust. I don't know. I should have done something." "Yes, you should have," I said, and there was no anger in my voice, only a sad, clear-eyed truth. "But you didn't. And now here we are." I ended the call, my hands steady. The power had shifted. It had shifted the moment I had chosen to see myself not as a victim of their carelessness, but as the keeper of a promise they had made and forgotten. The meeting was set for the following Monday. I would be walking back into that building not as a redundant employee, but as a contractual obligation they could no longer ignore. The day of the meeting, the sky over Port Blossom was a canvas of bruised purples and soft grays. A fine mist hung in the air, clinging to the windows of Eleanor's car as we drove downtown. I was nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness than before. It wasn't the anxiety of a victim, but the focused energy of a participant who finally understood the rules of the game. We walked into the Lumina building together. The receptionist, a young woman who had never bothered to learn my name, looked up with wide, curious eyes. This time we weren't escorted. We were expected. We were shown to the main boardroom, the one reserved for the highest level meetings. The long, polished table reflected the grim faces of the people seated around it. David Lowe was there, looking pale and diminished. Two sharp-suited lawyers from the company's legal firm sat beside him. At the head of the table was a man I had only seen a few times in company-wide town halls, Mr. Harrison, the CEO. Robert was conspicuously absent. Mr. Harrison stood as we entered, extending a hand. "Ms. Meadows, Ms. Vance. Thank you for coming in. We believe there has been a significant misunderstanding, and we're here today to clear it up and find an amicable resolution." Eleanor did not shake his hand. She simply inclined her head and took her seat, placing her slim leather briefcase on the table with a soft, definitive click. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice calm and clear. "There is no misunderstanding. There is only a contract. A contract which, for some reason, your team failed to honor in their initial separation agreement with my client." One of the lawyers immediately interjected. "Now let's not be hasty. The intent of the equity plan was for long-term retention. A termination, by its nature, is contrary to that spirit." "The spirit of the agreement is irrelevant," Eleanor cut in smoothly, without raising her voice. "We are here to discuss the letter of the agreement. And the letter is perfectly clear." She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the clause, enlarged and highlighted. "Your company terminated Ms. Meadows' employment without cause. As a direct result, her unvested equity became fully vested. It is a simple, direct, and legally binding consequence of an action you initiated." Mr. Harrison's practiced smile tightened at the edges. "We acknowledge that an oversight may have occurred. And in the interest of resolving this swiftly, we are prepared to make a new offer. A one-time cash payment equivalent to the estimated value of the shares, plus a 20% premium for your trouble." It was a significant amount of money. More money than I had ever seen. A year ago, I would have been stunned into grateful acceptance. But sitting there, with Eleanor's quiet strength beside me, I saw the offer for what it was, an attempt to buy my silence, to neatly package their mistake and file it away. I looked across the table, past the lawyers, past the diminished figure of David Lowe, and met the CEO's eyes. "No, thank you," I said. A stunned silence fell over the room. Mr. Harrison's eyebrows shot up. "I'm sorry. The contract doesn't state that I am entitled to a cash payment," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "It states that the shares themselves are vested. They are mine. I'm not interested in selling them back to you. Especially not before the quarterly earnings are announced and the new product line I helped develop goes to market." The two lawyers exchanged an alarmed glance. They had underestimated me. They had seen a quiet project manager, not a woman who understood the company's product pipeline and its potential impact on the stock price. Eleanor leaned forward. "As my client has stated, she is now a shareholder. As such, she is entitled to all the rights and privileges that come with that position. However, she is a reasonable woman. We are prepared to offer you a choice. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. Option 1. You can transfer the full, verified number of vested shares to a brokerage account in my client's name, effective immediately. We will sign a document confirming the matter is resolved. It will be clean and final. And option 2? Mr. Harrison asked, his voice tight. Eleanor's expression remained serene. Option 2 is that Ms. Meadows retains her shares and becomes a very active shareholder. Her first motion will be to call for an independent audit of the company's HR offboarding procedures, with a specific focus on the systemic failure to disclose equity vesting clauses to other terminated employees. I imagine your other shareholders, and perhaps the SEC, would be very interested in the results of such an audit. We would also need to discuss the potential for a class action suit. The color drained from David Lowe's face. Mr. Harrison stared at Eleanor, then at me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing the cost of a quiet settlement against the catastrophic cost of a public battle over corporate governance. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table. For 15 years, I had made myself small to make others comfortable. I had softened my words, swallowed my frustrations, and done my work in the quiet shadows of other people's success. Now, in this room, under the harsh fluorescent lights, I finally took up my own space. For 15 years, I gave this company my best, I said, my voice resonating with a clarity that came from deep within. And when you were done with me, you tried to erase me. You treated my loyalty as if it were worthless. The irony is, by doing so, you have made me more valuable to this company than ever. The choice is yours, Mr. Harrison. You can treat me with the respect a significant shareholder deserves, or you can explain to your board why you allowed a redundant employee to become your biggest liability. There was a long, heavy silence. Mr. Harrison broke eye contact first. He turned to his lead counsel and said, in a low, clipped voice, "Draft the transfer agreement. Get it done today." We walked out of the boardroom and into the cool, misty air of Port Blossom. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant victory. I felt a profound, quiet sense of peace. It was the feeling of a story finding its right and proper ending. Eleanor smiled at me as we waited for the elevator. "They saw you, Alara," she said softly. A week later, the confirmation landed in my inbox. A portfolio of shares, now in my name, representing 15 years of my life's work, finally and fully my own. I didn't pop champagne. I didn't rush out and buy something extravagant. I went out to my garden where the hydrangeas were in full, glorious bloom, their heavy heads nodding in the gentle coastal breeze. Finn chased a butterfly across the lawn, his tail wagging with uncomplicated joy. I had been erased, and in the space that was left, I had found myself. I had learned that self-respect isn't given to you, it's a garden you must tend yourself. I had learned that boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but lines that define where you begin. And I had learned that sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one that speaks the most undeniable truth. The future was an unwritten page, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt ready to be its author.